Welcome to another deep dive, and let me tell you, today is going to really make you think twice about, well, just about everything. We're going deep down the rabbit hole of interconnectedness, how seemingly random stuff like a detached leg causing a legal battle or a twerking scholarship stirring up a whole national debate actually reflects bigger things about us.
It's wild, right? How these kind of bizarre stories touch those sensitive spots in society, especially when we start questioning things we usually take for granted, like our bodies, our communities, and even this whole idea of choice.
And that's what we're all about today, untangling these hidden threads that link these crazy stories to the big questions like individual rights, societal structures, and just how we're all navigating this crazy mixed up world. You ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so get this. A man, his amputated leg, and a legal battle that make anyone go, huh.
The John Wood case, right? It really makes you wonder, can something surgically removed from your body, still be considered yours?
Exactly. And where does contract law end and this whole concept of bodily integrity begin? Talk about a clash of the titans.
Well, Wood has his leg amputated, right?
Yeah.
Unpaid storage fees, the whole shebang, the contents of the unit, including the leg, get auctioned off. Here's where it gets really wild. The buyer wants to use the leg as a roadside attraction.
A roadside attraction. Seriously, you can't make this stuff up. But it brings up a fascinating point, right? I mean, legally speaking, does someone buying a body part in an auction give them more rights to it than the person it, originally came from?
It really cuts to the heart of what we mean by ownership. Contract law, at its most basic, is about agreements, right? You agree to buy, someone agrees to sell, at a price, boom, it's yours. But when we're talking about a human body, things get complicated.
And that's where dignitarian interest comes in, right?
Bingo. It's this idea that some parts of our existence are just so inherently us, so deeply personal, they can't be treated like, just another thing you can buy or sell. Think of it this way. You can sell your car, but you can't sell your right to vote.
It's like there's this invisible line about what's considered okay to be bought and sold, even if we've got all these laws about contracts.
Precisely. The John Wood case throws that into sharp relief. Where do we draw that line? And what's really interesting is how this whole tension, individual rights versus commodification, isn't just about detached limbs. It pops up everywhere, even in some pretty unexpected places.
Like at that time rapper Juicy J decided to offer a $50,000 scholarship. But hold on, not for academics or sports. This scholarship, it was for the best chick that can twerk.
Now, that one blew up online, and for good reason. I mean, it really forces us to examine how we, as a society, value skills and talents, especially when it comes to women. What is it about twerking that makes people so uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Is it empowering, exploitative, or confusing mix of both?
And this whole thing about slapping a price tag on something seen as personal, maybe even kind of intimate, made me think about those luxury dating websites.
Yeah, where companionship is, for all intents and purposes, commodified, turned into a service, something you can buy and sell. Makes you think, how much of our lives are really shaped by market forces like that, blurring the lines between personal choice and, well, economic necessity?
It's a bit of a head trip when you really sit with it. Do you think everything's got a price tag in this day and age?
Now, that's a question we could spend hours unpacking.
Right.
But for now, let's switch gears to a story that's going to make you question this whole idea of choice. The tragic case of Gene Kranich and the pay-to-spray system.
Oh man, this one's tough. Kranich's house catches fire. Fire department shows up, and then they just watched it burn.
See, Kranich lived in one of those communities where fire services weren't a given. You had to pay an annual fee for protection, and tragically, he'd forgotten to pay that year.
So even though they were right there, they weren't obligated to help. That's just heartbreaking.
It exposes this really uncomfortable truth about how we often perceive community and responsibility. It's this idea that essential services are more like privileges, not rights, accessible only to those who can afford them.
And tragically, Kranich lost his life in that fire. It really makes you think how much of what we call choice is really just an illusion of agency, especially when you factor in things like systemic inequalities and historical baggage.
Heavy stuff, no doubt. And this whole dynamic takes on a whole new meaning in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember all those debates about masks, lockdowns, individual freedom versus public health?
Oh yeah, the tension was palpable. On one hand, you've got that deeply American ideal of individual liberty, right? The right to make your own choices, even if they seem risky to others. On the other, there's the stark reality that we're all interconnected and our actions impact those around us.
And, as we saw with the pandemic, those impacts can be, well, life or death, really. Remember the whole thing with the Great Barrington Declaration? Basically, the argument was, for this herd immunity approach, let the virus do its thing, even if it means more people getting sick, even dying, all in the name of protecting the economy.
Yeah, it felt like this really, I don't know, cold calculation, like some lives mattered more than others, you know?
It sparked a huge uproar, and for good reason. Forced us all to confront these really uncomfortable truths about, I don't know, who we value as a society and how we decide between individual freedom and the common good.
And honestly, those conversations about individual choice versus collective responsibility, they're not going away anytime soon, are they? But before we get too far down that road, let's shift gears a little to another fascinating part of this whole interconnectedness thing, the power of language, how it shapes what we perceive as real.
Which brings us to Christopher Rufo and that whole campaign against critical race theory.
This is a prime example of how something most people had never even heard of, this kind of obscure academic theory, becomes a weapon, right? Suddenly, everyone's terrified, outraged, and we're not even having real conversations about race and history anymore.
The thing is, Rufo himself admitted to basically reframing critical race theory. He used it as this catch-all term for anything he saw as too, I don't know, woke, too divisive for schools. His goal: start a culture war.
And man, did it work. Suddenly, school board meetings are battlegrounds, parents are protesting, books are getting banned left and right.
It's kind of scary when you think about it. It shows how easily language can be twisted, how it can be used to manipulate public opinion, shut down critical thinking, and ultimately, prevent any real progress on stuff like racial justice.
Makes you wonder, right? If this kind of manipulation can happen with something as nuanced as critical race theory, what else are we being influenced to think or believe without even realizing it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially in this digital age. Because this whole language manipulation thing, it's not just happening in politics. It's everywhere online, and we often don't even see it happening.
You know, it's funny you should say that. This whole conversation about algorithms and stereotypes reminded me of this time, I swear, an algorithm decided I was a hot Cheeto girl.
All because of a few online purchases I made. Can you believe that?
Oh, I totally believe it. That's a perfect example of how these algorithms, right, designed to be objective, to categorize and predict, they end up just reinforcing harmful stereotypes. And it's not just about snacks either.
Right. We've seen it with those racially biased medical algorithms, misdiagnosing patients or hiring algorithms discriminating against certain candidates. It's like these digital tools are soaking up all the biases that already exist and then amplifying them.
It's a huge wake-up call. Technology, for all the good it can do, isn't neutral. The people who create it, they shape it. And those people, just like all of us, they carry their own biases, their own assumptions. It's almost like we need to be as skeptical of the information we come across online as we would be, say, buying a used car from a guy who seems a little too eager to make a deal, right?
Exactly. We wouldn't buy a used car without checking it out thoroughly, would we? So why do we so easily just accept whatever we see online without that same level of scrutiny? It all comes down to digital literacy, to understanding how these algorithms tick, how data is collected and used, and how our own biases can, cloud our judgment.
Absolutely. Speaking of biases, this whole thing about algorithms and stereotypes got me thinking about this painting I saw a while back. It was this really striking image of a black leg being surgically attached to a white body. I spent weeks after seeing that image just, really wrestling with it. Like, who was this black body being used for parts? What were the ethics of it all?
Wow, that's a powerful image. Were you able to find out more about it?
Turns out it depicted a miracle, believe it or not, performed by Saints Cosmas and Damian, patron saints of medicine. They were known for grafting a leg from a deceased Ethiopian man onto a white Roman deacon who had cancer. The painting was called The Miracle of the Black Leg, meant to symbolize their healing powers.
Wow, that puts a whole different spin on it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What you saw as potentially exploitative was actually intended to symbolize, interracial harmony. At least through this lens of divine intervention. It really shows how our initial interpretations can be shaped by our own modern-day perspectives.
For sure. It's like this reminder to always dig a little deeper, question our assumptions, consider the historical and cultural context. And speaking of digging deeper, we were talking earlier about John Wood and his detached leg. It got me thinking, if there's this whole debate about the ownership of a detached body part, what about genetic material? Where does that fall on the spectrum of ownership and, inherent rights?
Now, there's a thorny issue, especially with all the advancements in genetic testing and reproductive technology. There was a legal case a while back that really brought this whole debate to light, the case of Jennifer Cramblett.
Oh, right. That was the case where a woman sued a sperm bank for wrongful birth, right, after being mistakenly inseminated with sperm from an African-American donor.
Exactly. Cramblett and her partner were both white, and they claimed that raising a biracial child in their mostly white town caused them emotional distress, financial hardship, all of that. They argued they had essentially purchased the right to a certain set of genetic characteristics, and the sperm bank messed up, violated their agreement.
So they were basically arguing that you could own specific genetic traits like they were commodities or something.
Exactly. And it raises some really uncomfortable questions, right? Can we really own genetic traits? Is it ethical to treat them like, items on a shelf to be bought and sold? The case was eventually dismissed, but it really ignited this huge conversation about commodifying genetic material and those disturbing implications of, valuing one race over another.
It's a sobering reminder that even now, in the 21st century, racism hasn't gone away. It's still there, under the surface, shaping how we see the world, influencing our choices, often without us even realizing it.
And it underscores how important it is to be aware of those ingrained biases, to challenge them, to work towards a society where everyone is valued for who they are, regardless of their genetic makeup.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it, how these threads of individual choice, community responsibility, historical baggage, they all seem to weave their way through all these stories. We talked about the COVID-19 pandemic earlier, but there's another story that illustrates this dynamic in a really unexpected way. The story of Leonard Castley, an Australian wheat farmer who declared his farm its own independent nation.
The Principality of Hutt River. Now that's what you call an extreme reaction to a government policy dispute.
Right. He was protesting wheat quotas the Australian government had imposed and decided to just, take matters into his own hands. He even went as far as printing his own money and issuing passports.
It was a bold move. Some might even say a little, eccentric.
Yeah.
But when you get down to it, it speaks to this very human desire for autonomy. That freedom to make your own choices, even if they go against the grain, challenge the status quo.
It's that whole rugged individualist spirit, right?
Yeah.
The kind of often associated with the American West. But as we've seen, prioritizing individual freedom above all else can have its downsides.
It's about finding that balance, isn't it? On one hand, individual liberty is absolutely crucial for progress, for self-determination. On the other hand, individualism without any regard for the well-being of the community, it can lead to, a breakdown of society, make it harder to tackle those challenges we all face together.
It's like that saying, your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins, right? There's this point where individual freedom bumps up against the need for collective responsibility, and finding that sweet spot, that balance, it's an ongoing struggle for all of us.
You said it. We need to figure out how to honor individual autonomy while also cultivating a sense of shared responsibility, recognizing that we're all part of this larger web, this interconnectedness. Our actions, good or bad, they have these ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
Like that butterfly effect.
Right.
A tiny action in one place can have huge consequences on something seemingly completely unrelated miles and miles away. Speaking of impacts, we were discussing earlier the power of language to shape perceptions and that worrying trend of censorship and suppression of information.
Yeah, it's a trend that's been rearing its ugly head throughout history in different ways. Think about the Catholic Church's Index of Forbidden Books or the Nazi book burnings. These attempts to control the narrative, silence dissenting voices, they're nothing new.
And unfortunately, we're seeing those same tactics being used today, although maybe in a less obvious way. Banning books, restricting what can be included in school curricula, all in the name of limiting discussions on things like race, gender, sexuality. These are prime examples of that.
It's a slippery slope, isn't it? The moment we start down that path of censorship, it becomes easier to justify silencing anyone or any perspective that challenges the dominant narrative. But it's through open dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable, that we learn and grow as a society.
Like that Voltaire quote, right? I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. It's a powerful reminder that even when we disagree with someone, it's essential to protect their right to express those views.
100%. If we don't have that fundamental freedom, we end up in an echo chamber where only certain perspectives are acceptable. And that's a dangerous path to go down.
It is. And often, those silent stories, the voices that have been marginalized and suppressed, that's where we find the most profound truths, the greatest opportunities for growth. There's a project that comes to mind that really embodies this idea, the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project.
Ah, yes. Their work is so important, especially now with so many people trying to downplay or erase those darker parts of our shared history.
It's spearheaded by Margaret Burnham, and they investigate and document racial terror lynchings that happened during the Jim Crow era, bringing to light this horrific chapter of American history that has largely been ignored.
Their dedication to uncovering the truth, to seeking justice for the victims, it's incredibly inspiring. They're giving a voice to those who were silenced, making sure these stories aren't forgotten, and helping us as a society to learn from the mistakes of the past.
It's like they're putting the pieces back together, you know? This puzzle someone tried to scatter, making sure these lost stories aren't really gone forever. It's a powerful reminder that truth and justice, they need us to stay vigilant, to really look at those uncomfortable parts of reality.
And it shows how these conversations, they're not just about what happened way back when, They're about understanding how the past is still shaping us, influencing what's happening right now and what might happen in the future. We can't fix those inequalities, those injustices we still see today without acknowledging where they came from.
It's about learning from the mistakes, right?
Mhm.
And working towards a better, fairer world for everyone. Which kind of brings us back to this idea of individual action versus, I don't know, collective responsibility. We talked about Gene Kranich, the tragic case with the fire, how we lost everything because of that pay-to-spray thing. But there's this other story, a total contrast, that highlights a totally different way of thinking about knowledge, about the common good, the story of Jonas Salk.
Jonas Salk, the guy who developed the polio vaccine. Talk about putting humanity first.
Can you imagine, though, the impact he could have had if he had, patented that vaccine, profited off it, but he made it free for everyone? Just blows my mind.
Says a lot about him, doesn't it? About his character, about truly believing in the power of, collective good. It's like a challenge to all of us. What do we really value? Is it all about individual profit, or do we recognize the importance of sharing resources, of everyone's well-being?
Makes you think, doesn't it? What if we thought that way about other big problems like climate change, access to healthcare, global poverty? What if instead of competition, self-interest, it was all about cooperation, the common good? I know it sounds kind of radical, but could you imagine?
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? And maybe it does sound a little idealistic, but there are examples of this stuff happening. Look at the sharing economy, community-owned businesses, that whole movement towards open source software technology. These are all about collaboration, sharing resources, everyone benefiting, not just individuals.
It's kind of hopeful, right? Shows that a different way of thinking is possible, shifting from me to we. But it takes effort, a willingness to challenge how things are, to believe in this shared humanity.
And a healthy dose of skepticism, especially in this digital age. We're bombarded with information constantly. Remember that whole thing with Sanna Marin, the Prime Minister of Finland? The leaked video of her dancing at a party?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That whole situation brought up a lot of questions about privacy, the role of social media, how those lines between public and private life can get so blurry. And it showed how easily technology can be used for, surveillance, manipulation, control.
It's a cautionary tale, that's for sure. As amazing as technology can be for connecting with people, for communication, it's got this whole other side. The Marin thing reminded us that we've got to be aware of our digital footprint, what we share, what it could lead to. It's about taking back control in a world where every move can be tracked, analyzed, even exploited.
Taking back control, setting boundaries, demanding transparency and accountability from those who hold all our data. We need to be more aware of how algorithms, how surveillance technologies, they can reinforce biases, chip away at our privacy, and ultimately, take away our autonomy.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about individual responsibility. We need to be pushing for policies that protect our digital rights, that make sure technology is developed ethically, that these powerful tools are used for good, not to cause harm.
It's about harnessing that potential, right? The potential of technology to empower us, connect us, inform us, but also protecting ourselves, our freedoms, our right to make our own choices. It's a tricky balance, but man, it's one worth fighting for.
Couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about all the connections we've explored. From that detached leg sparking a whole legal debate, to the twerking scholarship challenging how we value things, to those sneaky algorithms shaping how we see the world, these seemingly random stories offer a glimpse into this intricate web of relationships, systems, and choices that make up our world.
We've covered some heavy stuff today, uncovered some uncomfortable truths, questioned assumptions, and hopefully sparked some curiosity in all of you listening. As you go about your day, remember, your choices have a ripple effect. Your actions impact others. Your voice, it matters.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and never underestimate the power you have to make a difference.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting those dots.